Welcome everyone who's on this webinar from Geospatial Risk called the 20th Anniversary of Hurricane Katrina. I'm your host, Priscilla Cole, and I'm joined by my co-host, Chris Sams from NearMap. Hi, Chris. It's great to be on with you again.
Yeah, likewise, and thank you for this original invitation, and I loved it when the idea sparked, and I'm so glad we were able to get Phil and David to join us too. I'm really excited to hear what both of them have to say, especially coming from two different perspectives.
Definitely. So we had a big summit last January, which hopefully folks have heard about, but I got asked so many times leading up to that summit event if it was going to be recorded, if we had any way to share it, especially for people outside the country in different time zones. And this webinar is very much for all of you who asked for some free material that you could sign up for. It's just a lunchtime spot, so welcome. And yes, we're joined by our esteemed guests, David Maurstad and Phil LeGrone. It's very good to see the two of you. And both of them held very important positions during Hurricane Katrina, which we'll hear about a little bit later. So today our webinar looks back in history 20 years ago, almost to the day when Hurricane Katrina made landfall in the United States. This week, we've seen so many different documentaries and news stories come out looking at different angles of those events. And they cover some really important things, you know, many of them focusing on the loss, suffering, displacement, corruption, inequality, failures of communication. I mean, there's so much material, so many different things that people can focus on. But we've chosen a little different angle for this webinar. So we're looking at it through the lens of insurance and data collection, which is one of those little told stories you know, about what was happening around the event and how it was a wake-up call for many people, you know, in those industries. So we're going to start out with a little icebreaker with the people on this call, and then the audience can participate too. So you'll see in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, there are those 9 dots. If you click on them, you can go to the Q&A function, and we'd love to hear your stories about where you were during Hurricane Katrina when it hit. So I'll kick it off with my story. So I was living with what felt like the other side of the world. I was living in Seattle, Washington, and I had just started a new position out there. I had joined a volunteer corps, and I was working on nuclear waste issues, of all things. It's kind of random. And I hadn't been watching the news. And one day I was waiting at the bus stop for it to pick me up to go to work. And I heard some people behind me strike up a conversation, like 2 strangers. This woman was saying, like, have you heard the news? This awful storm, all of those people stranded in the Superdome. I just can't stop thinking about it. You know, this is occupying all of my headspace. Like she was so disturbed by this, she didn't even know how she was going to go to work. And that was really, you know, oh, what's happening? You know, I wanted to turn on the news for myself and hear what was going on. And then fast forward about 3 years later, I had finished that volunteer corps work and gone through grad school. And my first big project out of grad school came through grant funding from the US EPA through a program called Climate Ready Estuaries. And that funding had become available in response to Hurricane Katrina. And so we looked at things like downscaling climate models, you know, which is almost unheard of in 2008, and looking at regional impacts of storms and impact on the local economy and different resources, and kind of going through these thought exercises of what if another storm like this hit the region that I was working in. So in many ways, Katrina launched my career. It got me on this trajectory of following natural disasters, and here we are today. So I'll pass it to Chris Sams to tell, where were you, Chris, when Hurricane Katrina hit?
I was in San Francisco, California. I had just moved from Lawrence, Kansas to the Bay Area, and I was working for a risk catastrophe modeling firm called RMS, and I was very aware of the storm coming in. I was frantically running all types of scenarios, historical, stochastic models, and we were aggregating losses up to zip code and county levels, and even going down to higher resolution pieces where we're at building level. So I was very busy in that time, and was preparing for, I know, this hurricane to hit, because we wanted to have some preliminary loss numbers out, and I know that we sent a team there for reconnaissance as well. So very much involved, and this was my day-to-day for the next couple weeks after that.
We'll turn next to David. We'll have time to go into more of your story later, but just very briefly, where were you working during Hurricane Katrina?
Yeah, thank you, Priscilla, Chris. So I was with FEMA at the time, and I was in Anchorage, Alaska, attending back-to-back conferences. National Association of Flood and Stormwater Managers, NAFSMA, was meeting, and then followed up by the National Emergency Management Association, state directors from across the country. In addition, there was a special meeting set up with the Corps of Engineers leadership, with Floodplain Management Association leadership, both NAFSMA and the Association of State Floodplain Management leadership, on how all of us could work to better coordinate and better serve the needs of state and local concerns addressing the nation's flood problem. Obviously returned immediately to DC when it became apparent that it was going to be the event it turned out to be, a truly catastrophic event.
Yeah, wow. It's amazing that you were in meetings and then had to leave all those meetings to come back. How about you, Phil? Why don't you give us the skinny on where you were and where you were working during that time?
Sure. So I was actually at a major insurance company's office at the time, looking through hurricane claims file for the 2004 hurricanes, Charlie, Francis, Ivan, and Jean, trying to get a better understanding of what happened with those particular events, which, seemed like a major deal at the time. And then they were showing at their office there. And by the way, I was with a cat modeling firm like Chris at the time as well. They were showing on the Weather Channel, the path of Katrina and all the projections and the size of it and everything. And I was sitting there thinking, okay, I know what I'm doing next year. It's probably going to be that. And that it was definitely true. So that's where I was. And I was thinking, from a professional standpoint, what it meant to me. But also at the same time, there was a lot of projections about that hurricane making a landfall closer to Florida, where my mother was at the time, and she was already telling me she was going to refuse to leave. So I'm thinking, okay, and she's very close to the beach. So I'm thinking, okay. So it was a bit of a roller coaster, probably for everybody here, in different perspectives. But and I do remember that very well, looking at that event on Weather Channel and thinking, okay, where's it going to hit and what's it going to be?
Wow. Yeah, so the professional stories, and then the personal stories too, where it touches home, where you think, oh my, are my loved ones safe? For anybody who's just joined, we'd love to hear your stories of where you were during Hurricane Katrina. We have it up on the screen how you can click those dots and submit an answer. We'll be reading some of those a little bit later. But for right now, I'm going to turn it over to Chris. Chris has a little slideshow prepared to go through what happened around Hurricane Katrina, and kind of put us in the mood for some of the high-level facts.
Thank you, Priscilla. Yeah, there's going through this research, and I was in it day to day during like when the storm hit, but looking back now, just like all of the things I either had forgotten or never knew, one thing I had completely forgotten about was that it did hit Florida as a weaker Category 1 or like a very strong tropical storm. And you just really don't hear much about that. And I know that you can see on the map there that when it's going through the Everglades, you're not going to be hearing about the destruction or any of those things, especially because it's a very rural area. And that's something that I had completely forgot about, is Katrina hitting Florida first, and then really having that rapid intensification, which is something that really wasn't talked about a lot back then. And we hear it all the time now with the temperature of the Gulf. But that was the case with Katrina, and it elevated to a Category 5, built up massive surge, and then downgraded a little bit before it made landfall, but still a very strong Category 3 hitting Louisiana and Mississippi. And the economic loss as well as the insured loss are the costliest storm in U.S. history. And we've got a graph later on that Phil's going to be speaking about too, that really goes into detail about that. But many facts, or how many tornadoes were spun off of Katrina as well. It was so interesting and heartbreaking at the same time, reliving a lot of or revisiting a lot of these facts and what the destruction was in that area. And so and I now have family members. My wife's family is on the Gulf Coast of Mississippi, and I was able to speak with some of them about their experiences as well, and would love to kind of quickly go into those firsthand accounts of what happened there, and also the piece of the humanitarian acts as well. They were telling me that yes, there was death and destruction around all of them, and you couldn't tell where you were going because every landmark was destroyed. And they my wife's cousin lives in Pass Christian, and so does her aunt, and they were telling me stories of they didn't know quite where to go because it was hard to tell what direction you were looking in unless you could use the water as one of those pieces a geographic piece to guide you. And but they did say that people were visiting from all around the country to come and help. And yes, there were some people that were trying to take advantage of them with contractors, with roof scams and things of that sort. But the kindness and the humanitarian piece that came through for the human race really shined bright there. And my cousin was saying that he thought the ratio was at 10-1 when he was seeing good from people just coming down there to help, because everybody that especially if they live south of the railroad track, their homes were completely demolished, and slabs just left where complete houses were moved or turned 360 degrees or 180 degrees off of the foundation. And my cousin did tell me one story that some of the casinos that were they were just built and they were getting ready to have a grand opening. All the ATMs had just been stocked, and then Katrina hit. And there was a huge operation afterwards to find all of these ATMs that were now in the water. Just unfortunate timing, but he had story after story to be able to talk about. And there's two places on the map here that I've highlighted with the surge, and that is Pass Christian and Waveland, Mississippi, where record surge heights. You're seeing 24 to 28 feet of storm surge, and I've got some before and after pictures that are extremely heartbreaking. But you'll see that this house, first floor height elevation is 0, and after the storm completely wiped out cars from the neighborhood that was moved into this area. Then 6 years later, nobody was wanting to build there. You could see that there were so many vacant lots along the beach as well, and it really took some time for them to start building back. But imagine coming home to this and your house is completely gone, where there was 28 feet of storm surge water that had come in off the Gulf. And now today, There are much stricter building codes, and Phil, I'd love to get your perspective on what this means from a structural engineering perspective, where you have to have these requirements.
Yeah, and this type of thing has become a lot more common, not just in this area, but up the East Coast as well, where you see these types of requirements where you have to basically build the home up much higher to more accurately reflect the risk that is posed. And in that previous slide, one other thing I wanted to bring up in that previous slide, the middle image was the after, right? Where there's basically a pile of debris and it's like a car. And these claims had to be settled, right, by insurance companies as what was the wind, what was the water loss there when you just have that to work with, which, as you might imagine, really slowed down the process and made it a very expensive process to figure that out and to break up those losses in Mississippi because of these types of claims, which were generally called slab claims. It made it really slow to kind of get through, okay, what are we as an insurer on the hook for and not because of the coverage we provided or did not provide. So that really slowed things down. And one thing I did want to bring up was about a third of the claims, a third of the losses for Katrina were this area, this Mississippi Gulf Coast, primarily because of the surge. But you don't hear about it as much today because there's more focus on Katrina's human impact, which is where the people were, which was New Orleans, which we'll talk a lot about. But this is a little bit under the radar 20 years later of what happened there.
But no, exactly. And I think the folks that live in Mississippi as well thought that there's certainly the news coverage, there was a lot on New Orleans, and granted, much higher population there as well, but higher winds, much higher surge, because this was the east side of the eye where it hits, and much more damage was done to this area that a lot of people aren't quite familiar with. But certainly wanted to highlight that, and it was just a powerful piece to be able to revisit and hearing some of the stories that the people that live there. I was able to grab a couple shots from the company that I work for now at Nearmap, where we've got some oblique angles and we've got a vertical angle as well. And we have a catastrophe program where we will have planes out to capture post-catastrophe damage, and it helps speed up the claims process. It helps local governments, and I'll be able to talk about some of those use cases as well. But now I'd like to turn it back over to you, Priscilla, and maybe let David speak some as well.
Yeah, very good. Thank you, Chris, for that overview. Such powerful imagery of like that house and destroyed and then, put up on raised up, the elevation years later. Yeah. And so how about we stop sharing the slideshow, and I'll pin David up here. David, I want to give you a chance to tell your story. Wait, let me pin you. Did that work? There we go. Yeah, because you were working at FEMA at the time. You were working in the NFIP program, the National Flood Insurance Program, and that was a fairly new appointment there, coming off of Hurricane Isabel, what you were telling me about some of the prep. So I'd love to give you a chance to just tell about some of that experience.
Sure. So my journey, as I indicated, included 2 stints with FEMA, first from 2001 to 2008, starting as the regional administrator in Region 8, and then from 2016 to 2024, my path from regional administrator to the senior executive of the National Flood Insurance Program at headquarters in June of 2004 was to resolve some of the issues that had developed associated with Hurricane Isabel. Hurricane Isabel, it was in September of 2003, was turned to be an important turning point for the NFIP. Isabel caused about $500 million in NFIP claim payments, roughly 19,000 claims, and was concentrated in Virginia, Maryland, and North Carolina, but there was a great deal of controversy over claim payments and the performance of the NFIP. So FEMA used Isabel as a learning experience to improve the claims process, which was then immediately tested, as was mentioned, with the 4 Florida hurricanes in August and September of 2004, Charlie, Francis, Ivan, and Jean, with a combined 95,000 NFIP claims and a record $2 billion in claim payments. So after Isabel, the NFIP focused on some new processes, scaling up adjuster capacity, improving adjuster training, standardizing the WIO company, the insurance companies that handle the program on behalf of the federal government, company practices, clarifying policy holder communication, and placing insurance specialists in FEMA disaster recovery centers. A lot of times the NFIP flies under the radar when it comes to FEMA's work out in the field. And then importantly, very deliberately establishing relationships with state insurance commissioners and their staffs so that they would have an idea of what was going on with our program, even though they didn't have any responsibility for it. We found keeping them in the loop was very, very important to how the public reacted. All of this tested, so to speak, during the Florida hurricanes turned out to be critical building blocks when the $2 billion record of those Florida hurricanes was eclipsed by hurricanes Katrina, Rita, and Wilma, with a combined $17.5 billion in paid losses. I went to New Orleans and the Mississippi coast in the very early days post-Katrina landfill, and the devastation was remarkable in the tremendous destruction. In New Orleans, the levee failure, the pump system inoperable, thousands of homes underwater, and it stayed that way for weeks. The damage from the storm surge, as was mentioned on the Mississippi coast, was an unbelievable sight. As I drove around, you couldn't tell what was streets and what wasn't. You couldn't distinguish hardly anything. I saw a barge that was moved probably 300 yards, stuck in a Holiday Inn swimming pool. So everybody has stories like that. And while the take-up rate for flood insurance, unfortunately, is woeful across the nation, New Orleans actually is one of the exceptions, with well over 50% of property owners having NFIP coverage. And as a result, the team estimated there could be as many as 250,000 claims, or 20 times the number of claims for the Isabel event when there were some issues. And this is all what started the customer experience focused test, which made it crystal clear that extraordinary measures would be needed to be considered to deliver a customer experience policyholders deserve. I've always been troubled by the protection gap, especially when those that need it the most are the ones that are challenged the most with the cost of the insurance. So it seemed to me at the time only right to really take care of insured survivors, those who had been paying premiums, sometimes for years, with world-class service. There isn't time to dig into each measure that was implemented for Katrina with much depth. I can certainly address in the Q&A, but I would like to highlight those extraordinary measures that were in addition to what became the practice during the 2004 Florida hurricane experience. And all of these were in place in New Orleans and across the Mississippi Gulf Coast. The NFIP for the first time instituted advance payments to policyholders. Normally, claims require a full adjuster inspection and documentation before any payment, but after Katrina, the WIO companies and NFIP Direct were authorized to provide advance payments to policyholders before the full claims process was completed, so that families could begin repairs and recovery sooner. We simplified the proof of loss requirements. After Katrina, we extended deadlines and in many cases waived the requirement for the traditional proof of loss. We expedited adjuster processes, allowing adjusters to use streamlined estimating methods for widespread damages instead of itemizing every single item. And as you recall, there were many properties that had had standing water for months, or just a slab of concrete remaining, or the standing pilings that supported the elevated homes. The NFIP partnered closely with the private insurance companies, the WIO companies, to fast track claim approvals and payments. We relaxed certain administrative requirements so WIO insurers could pay policyholders more quickly. We expedited the adjuster process. Adjusters were authorized to use streamlined estimating methods for widespread damages. And that was really something that was extraordinary, that needed to be done, which led to special procedures for total losses. As you know, the house is completely gone, you had a total loss. So we allowed the insurers to bypass the lengthy documentation and settle for policy limits far more quickly. And finally, the whole filing deadlines, some of were extended because of the disaster scale, and were significantly extended. So you might be thinking, so what? Well, all of these measures, the tremendous dedication from NFIP staff and the commitment from the private sector that supports the NFIP were essential in closing 95% of Gulf Coast claims within 9 months. And under these circumstances, that's, pretty remarkable. And the NFIP was able to sidestep all the controversy that was associated with the event. We really, again, flew under the radar. So in addition to providing that excellent customer service, we protected the NFIP brand.
Yeah.
And to bring this to a close, these extraordinary steps taken after Katrina were once considered one-time emergency measures, as the types of bulletins that I issued. But after Sandy's backlash over delayed and underpaid claims, the NFIP moved to institutionalize these practices, making them standard tools for handling catastrophic flood events in the NFIP today.
Yeah, and that impact of customer service. Actually, do you mind muting your mic now, David? Or I'm not sure where the feedback's coming from, but yeah, that impact of customer service has such an outsized, view from the people on the ground of how they recover and how safe they feel, and if they feel like those things were effective, like they're paying the premiums for so long, like where is that service when the big day comes? And I know that you were telling me, David, in the prep of some of the decisions around wind damage versus water damage and how that played out in NFIP decisions around Katrina. Do you mind elaborating just a little bit on that?
Yeah, sure. And Phil, as Phil mentioned, in the private sector, whether it be auto, homeowner, and that, it's critical because homeowners policies exclude flood coverage. And so there were certainly many instances where it would either be near impossible or very hard to determine whether wind or flood caused the loss. The NFIP, being a government body, took a different approach. We believed if you had a flood insurance policy and your home wasn't on its slab anymore, that was a flood loss, and we paid the claim. And so that was more or less the strategy or the implementation that we took. And so the NFIP did have a lot of issues, because if the house was still standing there, you had water lines, and so you generally have an idea of how far the flood went up. But unfortunately, people that have a flood insurance policy don't always have adequate limits, and so that's why policy limits and getting to policy limits so quickly, instead of, figuring out if I had $80,000 worth of coverage on my home, for example, and we start through the process and we get to $80,000, what's the purpose of continuing to see all the rest of the damage that probably took that loss to $200,000? There really was no real reason from a customer experience to do that. And so we, of course, the program was brought into some of the lawsuits. Unlike Isabel that I mentioned before, where the criticism was we weren't paying we weren't paying what we were supposed to pay. After Katrina, the program was essentially, I'll use the word accused, of paying more than we should have paid. And that we were actually paying claims that the private insurance companies should have provided. And so it was interesting to see that other side of the coin in such a short period of time. We were brought into lawsuits, no question about it. And we're a part of it, but it wasn't our involvement in those lawsuits was the NFIP at fault in some way? It was, did the NFIP do too much and in essence take the private sector off the hook? I took the position in all of what I saw, and I saw firsthand very few claims in the private sector, homeowners or auto, that were not handled appropriately. That was my personal experience in the field. Now, clearly, some courts found different in certain circumstances, but it got messy. Fortunately, the NFIP wasn't in that messy part of that bucket.
Yeah, it's a fascinating story. And I think this is a really good transition point now to Phil telling, your story through all of this, because we heard David from, the public side of the fence and NFIP insurance. And, Phil, you have all these firsthand accounts watching the private sector insurance.
Chris, if you wouldn't mind sharing that slide on the event losses. So I think this slide, and you don't even have to know specific events that well, except the top line is Katrina. And if you kind of squint and you don't nearly see anything else in focus, you realize pretty quickly this is the big boy, right? This is the driver of a lot of losses over the last 20 plus years. And there's some events down here that I wanted to comment on. One is Andrew, which is about, I don't know, half, 2/3 the way down. And Andrew was the event, the hurricane event that signaled to the industry that you had to change how you were quantifying risk. And really that pointed to using a probabilistic model to do it, which had only been in place for a handful of years for earthquake only in the US, to get a better understanding of your portfolio loss and your reinsurance purchase and such. So Andrew, Cat 5, hit near the Miami metro area. Actually, it was similar to Katrina. It missed the main metro area, but did a lot of damage. Very strong, powerful hurricane event. Was really the catalyst for, okay, we need to use this type of approach to do more to understand what our hurricane risk is. And then in essence, 13 years later, Katrina comes in, and obviously it's a much bigger loss, and we're kind of going to get into some of the reasons why. It was quite a major event. And now if you kind of then get into focus of some of these other events, you see COVID, you see the 9/11 attacks, you see Europe flood loss as well. These are all modeled now. At the time, in 1992, they were not. But since there's been more and more need and more pressure and learnings, to kind of borrow some of what David was just saying, need to learn about what happened. How can we do this better? How can we quantify the risk better and make decisions better? And really, after Andrew occurred, there was a lot of improvement in the insurance industry to to actually get more like granular on what the risk is, where the risks are, and on the claims data as well, to get a lot more granular on what are the drivers of those different claims that then can be used, leveraged directly into the CAP models to get a better understanding of what's going on here. And then Katrina comes along and there's some new wrinkles thrown in, new learnings that have to happen to do a better job of actually quantifying the risk going forward. And what was, or why was Katrina different? Whether there's a lot of reasons, but some of the main ones are, it was a near direct impact of a major urban area in the United States, which actually is not as common as some people might think. It was actually just to the east of New Orleans. It was a Cat 3, but most people thought it was a Cat 4 at the time, and it actually took a little while to actually diagnose it back to, no, it's a Cat 3, a very strong Cat 3, but it was a Cat 3 nonetheless. Another issue is 50% of the metro area was below sea level. That's uncommon in the U.S. as well. It actually doesn't exist anywhere else in the U.S. for a major urban area to be below sea level, or at least half of it. And then 80% of the city was actually flooded to some extent, whether that be a few inches or up to the roof, which did definitely happen in some of the areas protected by levees, which brings me to my next point. Vast amount of levees encompassing the whole area of New Orleans. And you can see a couple images here, before and after images of the impacts of the city, and most people are aware of the iconic impact of the iconic Superdome, where people were inside and then outside for days and days afterwards before getting evacuated. The levees actually go back over 300 years. Yeah. So this map here, these couple have the 1903 and the 1992 version of the levees. And one thing that sticks out to me is how wide a geographic area, or big a geographic area, is covered by these levee systems. And these levees have been challenged in the past by storms, including before Hurricane Katrina in 1965, Hurricane Betsy caused failures of the levees and flooding in these areas. So this is not new, and work had been done since 1965, post Betsy, to prepare for another hurricane event. So this is not a new thing for New Orleans, but it is a new thing for the industry and for CAT modelers to try to quantify what is going on, what are the losses that are occurring. And we fast forward to today. The current levee system in New Orleans, obviously still protecting a large geographic area, and it's really kind of astounding to me if you look at these lines, with the orange line being the levee boundaries and the darker line being the Mississippi River levees, just cover such a giant area of metro New Orleans. So obviously this is a major part of the challenge that was presented when Katrina made landfall just to the east of New Orleans. And one other thing I wanted to point out was, 1 year prior to this event, there was a simulated Hurricane Pam, which was not a real event. It was just, let's go through the process and see, how this could work if we did have this type of hurricane hit the area. And a lot of things that they found during that simulated event, as far as basically the coordination of evacuation of people and such, definitely came to pass. There was just really little to no time to actually act on it, but it was notable. And to their credit, they were going through the process of trying to figure out where are our weak points. It just, in my opinion, didn't have enough time really to actually fix all that stuff, because it doesn't happen.
I'm off mute here. Yeah, no, thank you for that, Phil. Such a good overview of everything that happened, and I love all the different graphics that you put together to, really kind of highlight like where the levees were and the system and the area that was impacted. I think that this is a good time to go to the part of our agenda where we talk about data collection. And I'm going to start us off. Chris, do you mind pulling off up the slides again with the for Chris?
Okay.
So to cue us up for this, I had a conversation with Chris Vaughn before this, and I wanted him to come join this panel as well, but Chris is actually at another event up on stage in a different panel right now. So he couldn't be with us today, but he gave a prepared statement and permission to read it during this. So Chris says, during Hurricane Katrina, I deployed in support of FEMA's urban search and rescue teams as a contractor with the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. That mission marked one of the first large-scale uses of commercial satellite imagery in the US disaster response. But back then, we only had a few satellites like QuickBird and Iconos, and no cloud infrastructure to lean on. Downloading gigabytes of raw imagery was painfully slow, and everything, processing, pan sharpening, tilting, had to be done manually and in the field, often overnight. When it worked, the impact was revolutionary. We could finally visualize the extent of the destruction in near real time. Everyone immediately recognized the potential, but the tools and infrastructure just weren't there yet. It wasn't until Hurricane Sandy in 2012 that cloud-based technologies began to transform how we accessed, processed, and applied commercial satellite imagery during disaster operations. Now, 20 years on, we have access to hundreds of satellites, real-time AI-driven damage assessments, and seamless integration into mobile and desktop platforms. What was once experimental is now indispensable. And, I think it is important to point out in all of this disaster response how much chaos is happening when you're on the ground. And it's hard to know where the devastation hit the hardest, how to triage, where to go in. I'm sure, David, you could probably go on and on and on about this, about, just how difficult it was to know, where to go in, or, how to even begin assessing. But now there's so much more data and technology that contribute to our understanding of these events, of our response, of how these damages are calculated and so forth. And so from there, I'll turn back to Chris, because I know you had a few words to say on this.
I do. Thank you. And no, it rings true. Like 2012, and with Nearmap, I lead the product program called our Impact Response program that captures a lot of post-catastrophe imagery, and we're able to get that turnaround roughly 24 hours. That's our goal. Sometimes it's better than that, depending on the location, or when the planes are allowed to have clearance from the FFA or air traffic control, or if it's cloudy, though. Like we're not going to be able to capture the imagery if it's still raining and flooding there. But the turnaround time has been something that our clients are very thankful, and says like that brings a lot of value to them. And we have a lot of insurance companies as clients. We have a lot of government entities as clients. We have commercial, architectural, engineering, construction firms as clients as well. And we're able to process this imagery very fast, get that to them in a cloud environment where they're able to access it, download it locally if they needed to. And then we're also able to run our AI detection afterwards, which takes 2 to 3 hours after the imagery is done. And we're identifying on a FEMA scale of major damage, destroyed, minor damage. And so they're able to triage quickly where is most of the damage is. It's like finding the needle in the haystack. And it's maybe not be 100% accurate all the time, but it's with those classifications, but it also means that they know where not to look. And I think that is a huge piece of like, let's focus our efforts in this particular spot. And it's allowed them to save lives, quickly help people that are in need. And then from an insurance perspective, oh, this house is completely destroyed. We're going to go ahead and write this claim off and get this person settled, and it makes them look good and from their perspective as well. So I think it's all around helpful for our communities, determining the safe.
Oh no, did we lose Chris?
He was on a roll too.
Okay, he was on a roll. Oh shoot. Well, that's okay. Hopefully he'll come back on. Okay. There you are. Okay.
Yeah, sorry, I could hear you guys. I'm sorry. I apologize for that. But I was certainly on a roll and started to get a little passionate about it. But yeah, with the program, we've covered 42 events. I thought I saw a question come up. Someone asked what CAT was. That is an abbreviation for catastrophe. And we've got very high resolution imagery, and our team is phenomenal about getting a quick turnaround. They're a team of meteorologists and geospatial experts, have the planes positioned in very good spots where tornadoes, hurricanes hit, and wanted to certainly give them a shout out because I get to ride their coattails a little bit being the product manager.
Yeah, very good. Thank you, Chris. And pointing out, there's so many different technologies available now. There's drones, and I was just reading this morning. Someone has a company that has launched a whole bunch of weather balloons that they're sending out into the middle of the ocean. Like in Hurricane Erin, they got some really interesting data because there's some real blind spots that we have as these things are coming across the ocean. There's a lot of interpolation because we don't have granular data always out in the ocean. And throwing a little bit of my experience in here too. I used to work for a satellite company called ISI that would provide data for things like flooding and storms and so forth. And the number one question that came up when I would go visit insurance offices was, can you distinguish the difference between damage done from wind versus water? Mm-hmm. And it's really interesting that now, even with all this data, there are some of these big open questions that were relevant 20 years ago that still plague us today. And we're all these companies, whoever can finish that race to give that very clear picture from above of is the damage from wind versus water. It's such an important thing to solve right now. I saw a lot of nodding and uh-huhs. David, Phil, I'd love to get a little bit more of your reaction to that.
I was just going to say the speed of reaction by insurers to pay claims, to understand claims better is definitely, we've come a long way. And David was mentioning, how they address that in NFIP by paying claims faster and stuff. The quicker you can do that, first of all, smaller the claim, right? Faster you can do that, the smaller the claim is going to be, and also you're meeting your policyholder, that terms of that contract that you have with them as well. So it's good for customer relationships, and it's also good for lowering the claims around the same time. And I think that's something we didn't learn it just from Katrina, but definitely learned it, very hard way. I think from Katrina, we need to do a better job as an industry, insurance industry, in addressing these issues.
No, and I think from all of us, if we're personal policy owners too, getting that check back into our hand as fast as possible, that goes a long way. When it drags out months and weeks and possibly years, that's very frustrating from a person that has this policy. And then if your house is gone, who knows what's going on in your personal life as well.
Yeah. Okay. So I think it's important to at least point this out one time in the call. There's a lot of changes happening right now to FEMA and funding and whose responsibility is it and data collection. But you know, we don't have to articulate all of those. I'm sure folks have been following the news, but I'd love to get your reaction to some of these things that are going on. What worries you, and you know, also if there's any ray of hope in any of this. I don't know who wants to go first. Phil, you're off mic right now. Do you want to go first?
Sure. This is obviously a tricky topic, but I do think on the ray of hope side, I'm concerned that especially research into phenomenon that drives risk, the federal government backing away from that, the potential for that happening is a concern for me. But also am seeing more and more of the private sector entering into that, filling that gap, trying to come up with new ways, insurtechs in particular, new ways to quantify risk, new ways to attack it. Some of these have already been addressed during the course of this call. That gives me hope that, you know, there is a will to quantify the risk, and that is going to be something that, and maybe in the long term, a better fit for the insurance industry as a whole to drive better decision making. In the short term, maybe not, you know, concerned about that, but in the longer term, there is to me a pretty solid ray of hope that can be addressed.
David, do you have anything to throw on to this?
Yeah, so in my, you know, my old space, you know, insurance and mitigation, the what concerns me the most is the momentum, the progress that has been made over the course of the last 25 years in understanding what it means to be a resilient nation, a resilient community, a resilient neighborhood, and a resilient family. And that, yes, you can transfer some of the risk, but there are also steps that can be taken to minimize the risk, to reduce the likelihood of loss of life and damage to property. And so it's in my opinion, and only my opinion, a lot of progress has been made over that 25 years of getting people to understand that the mitigation / insurance / resilience piece of emergency management is just as critical as the response nature of emergency management and the recovery nature of emergency management. And so my concern and what I'm spending a fair amount of time on is making sure that that momentum associated with understanding the value with mitigation and the return on investment for mitigation activities, and the importance that mitigation grant dollars from the federal government and how important that is to leverage resources many times scarce at the local and or state level for these types of activities, that we take a step back in that momentum. And so I think it's incumbent on all of us that are in this space to do what we can to continue to carry the water, so to speak, when it comes to emergency management, response, recovery, resilience, mitigation, and insurance, so that that momentum can continue, so we can reduce disaster suffering in the future. That's what this is about in my mind. And so there are things that we can do that will reduce the loss of life and reduce damage to property. And so let's keep that momentum going.
Yeah, well said. Hear, hear. I've forgotten the statistic right off the top of my head. Maybe one of my other guests can help. But for every dollar invested in mitigation adaptation results in what's the number? What's the latest number of uplift?
Well, you can go 6 to 1, you can go 8 to 1, you can go 12 to 1, depending upon, you know, what the hazard is, quite frankly. Yeah. And so, but the return is substantial. Is my point. And the whole life cycle of understanding your risk, determining what can be done to minimize or reduce that risk, and if not, transfer that risk, and then to take action. And that, unfortunately, is an area where human nature is as what it is. Sometimes we can know what the right thing is to do,
Yeah, thank you. You know, this hour sure flew by fast, but I want to make sure that we get to some of the feedback that people put into the comments. So there's one person that entered that he was evacuated from New Orleans to Jackson, Mississippi. Just I'm sure that that's a story. I wish that we had more time to dig into that one. You evacuated to one place and then to another state that was also impacted by Hurricane Katrina. We have someone who was in Long Island, New York, working with U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, working on aerial orthophoto mosaics following the hurricane. So, you know, a lot of, I shared in the beginning that Katrina really launched my career into disasters. I bet there's a lot of other people on today that's true as well. You know, they got sucked in one way or the other to work on the storm, and, that kept them going. There are some people who were probably too young to remember. I mean, 20 years ago, like we could have some people on that were very small or maybe even born since, which is just wild to think about. That much time has passed. We have a good one here. Here's a question. What are the reasons for lower claim value if they're paid quicker? Who wants to take that one?
I can chime in there.
I'll chime in after you, Phil.
Okay. The quicker you get to a claim, the less damage there typically is, because it stays out in the elements less before the repair actually happened. I mean, that's the general thinking, is the faster you get in there, you evaluate the damage, you fix the damage, the lower the loss is, because you don't have that additional time for things to actually get worse.
Yeah, if it's still leaking, 3 weeks later, there's going to be more damage in there than originally happened if you're able to get on that quickly.
Including like mold and things like that,
Mm-hmm.
that can happen. So.
Yeah, and materials get a lot more expensive, right?
That's a very good point.
The demand surge part of the equation that, if everybody's running to Home Depot and then they run out, or, whatever the story is, not sporting any particular brand here.
So I think I saw a question, someone asked about like the coverage area for like the past two years for NEARMAP on the post-catastrophe. There were 42 events that we covered, and we've almost covered 60,000 square miles in those 42 events. So boom, there's some statistics for you.
There you go. Good work. Those planes are busy at NEARMAP. You heard it right here. Well, thank you everyone for joining. That hour flew by so fast. I'm Priscilla Cole on behalf of Geospatial Risk. Thank you to, Phil and David and Chris. This was a great conversation. I want to point out that we're doing some more programming with Geospatial Risk. There's another free webinar coming up in 2 weeks. We have, it's kind of a more technical demos and so forth. So that should be really fun to get into, a focus on flood, but also big natural disaster component. And there's programming around Climate Week in New York City. If you happen to be in town for that, we're doing 3 days of programming, and then a mini Geospatial Risk Summit later in January as part of North 51. So I hope that you enjoyed today. Thank you everyone for tuning in. If you weren't able to tune in, this recording will be hosted on our sister podcast, Risk Money Location. So thank you all.
Thank you, Priscilla.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.